right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today here on Point of View. We're going to look back over this week. What a week this has been. Judge Andrew Napolitano called it the 7 days in May, so we'll certainly cover some of the issues in the news, look at a couple of stories that are rarely, if ever, covered by the mainstream media, including some having to do with religious liberty, and then look ahead to a trip that Donald Trump will be taking to a number of countries in the Middle East. So we have a lot to cover today. In studio with us, Jeremy Dice, who is, of course, the senior counsel for First Liberty, and Debbie Georgatos, who is the host of America Can We Talk? So lots to cover here today. Jeremy, let me come to you for just a minute. One of the first articles we have here is whether or not in a courtroom a justice of the peace, actually, or a judge or any individual could actually pray or have somebody pray in the courtroom. You wouldn't think that that would be controversial, but you would be wrong, because our good friends, and I'm using this with a little bit of facetiousness, Freedom from Religion Foundation is trying to prevent that from taking place.
Well, and look, the Supreme Court has spoken to this issue not once, but at least twice on this thing, and certainly opening public meetings with prayer has been cleared by the Supreme Court as something being perfectly constitutional. So it's kind of surprising when the Texas Supreme Court opens their meetings with prayer and the legislature opens their meetings with prayers. The Justice of the Peace, Judge Mack here, ought to be allowed to do the same thing as well. And the way that he does it is also very interesting.
Yes,
the reason for it is very interesting. He's also the county coroner. Mm-hmm. And so in his work, he's seen a lot of grisly stuff and families in their worst situations that you could possibly imagine. And as a result from that, he said, look, maybe there's a way to bring some comfort to that. So he invited the entire community of faith in that community to participate in this chaplaincy program. And so you've got representatives of literally all the faith groups that are in that county, in Montgomery County, coming and helping out, caring for these people. And so if you watched the press conference on Wednesday of this week, you saw the representatives of the Buddhist faith, of some Buddhist monks were there as well, Catholic, the whole range of people down there. And they're the ones that are actually providing these invocations. It's a great, diverse showing of a very good community down there. And they're all very excited about this program and very upset that this lawsuit even exists, as is the Attorney General.
And again, if you watch the lawsuit and the press conference and some of the things that you talked about in terms of the lawsuit, you had not only you talking about this, but the Attorney General of the state of Texas right next to you. Yeah,
a couple months ago when this was a question about someone had lodged a complaint of a judicial ethics violation against Judge Mack here. And the Attorney General weighed in on that discussion and said, no, look, this practice is perfectly fine and constitutional, and we would defend it. And so he's made good on his word. He's intervened in this lawsuit and is asking the federal court to dismiss it as baseless.
I thought it was notable that in this case, the Freedom from Religion Foundation, which was challenging Judge Mack's ability to open his hearings with prayer, they gave an example. They said they had in the complaint, they recited that they had people who had been in the courtroom during prayers and felt intimidated and didn't leave the courtroom during the prayer service for fear it would negatively impact their cases. Well, that's exactly the same kind of argument years ago that people made in the Supreme Court, arguing about removing prayer from public school, where some children might be uncomfortable. And because, I can remember this from law school, the whole description going on and on about these kids who felt really uncomfortable because they were Jewish or atheist and they didn't like what seemed to be Christian prayer. And that was very persuasive with the court. That was at least recited in the Supreme Court decisions striking down prayer was, well, kids feel uncomfortable. And I love that we're a little bit smarter than that in Texas and in these newer cases, just saying one person's discomfort does not shut down First Amendment rights for everybody else.
Especially when the judge is not even in the room. Judge Mack's not actually present in the courtroom when this is going on, so he would have no way to be able to exercise favor or disfavor on anyone. It's just a matter that these chaplains, he's made this available to them. If they'd like to be able to use this opportunity to do that, he's given his blessing over it in his courtroom, and look, he should be permitted to do that.
We have two lawyers here. Let me talk about one of the phrases that's used sometimes, the heckler's veto, because in some ways, isn't that exactly what freedom of religion is saying? If I feel that this would be making me uncomfortable, or if I disagree with that, I should then, because even though most people are not uncomfortable, just because I feel uncomfortable, I could shut down any kind of debate or discussion or presentation.
Exactly. I mean, this is why we've had so many discussions in recent months about the snowflakes on campus having problems with someone coming in and presenting them with a different way of thinking about things. If we can veto that by our heckler's vote or whatever we want to call that, and then it's just a hop, skip, and a jump, and not even that, to be able to shut down other speech that you don't agree with. And we can talk about cases ad nauseum that these are. I mean, we've got the Kleins are excellent example of that. We don't like the way you believe and the way you operate your business according to those beliefs. Get out of the public square. Or go back to Hobby Lobby. We don't agree with the way that you run your business according to your beliefs. Get out of the public square. Dr. Eric Walsh. We don't like the fact that you preach on Sundays and come to work as a public health official on Mondays. Get out of the public square. That's not how we've operated our country for 200 plus years now. Instead, we want a very diverse society that tolerates a multitude of religious and opinions that are out there, both religious and secular of nature, so that we can pursue truth with one another and come to an understanding of what is right.
That is 100% right. I love this whole issue is coming up, especially as it relates to colleges, because in America, we have had a trend, and Jeremy was doing a great recitation to some of those cases, where the thought appears to be of the administration of professors is that the higher goal, the higher mission of academia is to protect people's sensitive feelings, when really it is contrary to the, I know it's a trend, it's a kind of trite term to use, but the hallmark of Western civilization is the vigorous debate around ideas, the vigorous discussion about what you believe, what I believe, why do we think that? We go back and forth and respect each other, and it's one of the foundational kind of core American ideals that is really under siege in America. So I love even a relatively small case like this, that we're saying, no, actually that's not enough to have your feelings hurt. Doesn't mean someone else's First Amendment rights are shut down.
Let's talk about another prayer case, and that is you are up in Maine, Augusta, Maine, and we broadcast in Maine as well as Texas, and so a lot of these stories relate to people in this community. This is a school worker that would say things like, I'll pray for you, or you were in my prayers, and that was enough to bring about some kind of censure. And you just came back from that particular situation, didn't you?
Yeah, no, it's up in Augusta, Maine. Tony Richardson is a case, and you can read about the whole thing at firstliberty.org/Richardson. And I'd encourage you to go there to read the actual complaint that we filed here, because it goes into great detail. And what happened was very simple. Tony is a special needs assistant teacher, basically, an educational technician, they call them, and she helps out with these emotionally and physically challenged students and get them through the classroom. Well, another person in her classroom was having, another one of the ed techs was struggling with adjusting to that classroom and was really having a hard time with it all. It's a very intense work environment, and he was having a real difficult time. After school, the kids had left. She's alone in the classroom with him, and just trying to encourage the guy, says, look, I just want you to know I'm going to pray for you and hope that that'll help out. He thanks her, is really grateful for that whole thing. They happen to go to church together on the weekends. So he's very grateful for that. And some weeks go by, or some days go by, and she's in front of the Human Resources Department. They kind of push aside the topic they were talking about and say, now, have you ever identified to somebody on campus here that you're a Christian? Well, yeah, I think so. Have you ever told someone sort of like religious language? Because I don't know what that means. Have you ever used phrases like, I'm praying for you? And she goes, well, I know people from various contexts outside of school district. And yeah, I have. So long story short, she gets this coaching memorandum saying, you can't say words like, I'm praying for you. And if you do it again, you're going to face discipline and even possibly dismissal.
We'll talk more about that particular case. And again, we have a link to that as well at First Liberty. We'll come back and talk about prayer and then get into the 7 days in May right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Tomorrow in theaters throughout America will be the film In Our Hands, The Battle for Jerusalem, produced by CBN. June 5th marks the 50th anniversary of the 1967 Six-Day War in Israel. This film is an accurate depiction of what took place and will help tell the story that few people in America know about the battle. Arab nations surrounding Israel had a battle plan to wipe Israel off the map. The young Jewish nation was both outmanned and outgunned. Not only did Israel survive, the troops moved into Jerusalem and even occupied the Golan Heights. Production for the film took about a year to complete. Gordon Robertson was in the studio with me to promote the film and talked about the various permissions they had to receive from the Israeli government to shoot in the actual places where the battles took place. The arms and uniforms are authentic or reproductions. Some of the most pivotal battle scenes are shot at Ammunition Hill, and the film is told through the compelling stories of the Israeli paratroopers. One of the most memorable scenes shows a woman who gives a flag to the battalion commander. She explains that she brought the flag to him because it flew in the old city before they left in 1948. She wanted him to hang the flag on the city once again. You know, in the last 50 years, archaeologists have uncovered some of history's most important archaeological finds in and around Jerusalem. These discoveries were only possible because Israel was able to occupy the city after the Six-Day War. There are some dark stories in the film. There were Israeli deaths and casualties. People were injured both physically and mentally, but the movie does try to provide light in the midst of the dark reality. Michael Medved calls it one of the most moving films I've seen this year and a fitting 50-year commemoration of a crucial turning point in world history. I hope you go to a theater tomorrow to see it. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
In Our Hands, the battle for Jerusalem. In select theaters one night only, Tuesday, May 23rd. Information at inourhands1967.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Jeremy Dice with First Liberty, as well as Debbie Georgatos, the host of America Can We Talk. You're going to have a lot to talk about on Sunday on your radio show. I don't know how you're going to do it in 2 hours. We're going to try to do it in 2 hours today, but I have no idea. But we already posted one article, and this is one that I think tells you a little bit about this idea of prayer in the courtroom in Texas. We've now jumped to Augusta, Maine, and we always love to hear from our listeners up there in Maine. And one of the things we have there, which also you can find at First Liberty, is the Todd Starnes commentary. And this brings us something to something I know that you want to talk about, Debbie, because some people say, well, you know, maybe Ms. Richardson was really, really confrontational. And so Todd Starnes, with a smile on his face, says, well, was Ms. Richardson forcing her coworkers to convert to Christianity? Did she attempt to baptize him against his will? The answer to that is no. This was something which was done out of a great deal of compassion. It wasn't coercive. And yet here you have the school district say, you cannot say anything. You can't let people know you're a Christian. You can't say that you're praying for them. And you can see why there are a lot of people that are just once again rolling their eyes at what's happening up there in Augusta, Maine.
Yeah, absolutely. That was the question I asked for our listeners during the break. I asked because you wonder, it sounds so absurd if that's all she was doing was kindly offering to a fellow church member who happened to work with her, may I pray for you, or I'd like to because I see you're upset. And, you think, well, gee, maybe she was pestering everyone. Well, the truth is, if she was pestering everyone, it would be the same thing as if you pester them about, please buy, Girl Scout cookies for my daughter. But if you're pestering people, you're harassing people at work, religion or whatever your topic is. But to be really clear in this case, that's why I asked about it. And actually, Jeremy was up there firsthand. That was not the case at all with this woman.
No, not at all. I mean, she was simply trying to encourage him. And had he said, no, that really offends me, please stop, she would have been the first one to stop. But in fact, he said, thank you. That was very helpful to me. And the next day she reiterated that, hey, I really did pray for you last night. And he said, oh, I'm really, really thankful for that. For the school district here to put in writing that you cannot use phrases like, I will pray for you in a private conversation with a coworker with whom you go to church with is just absolutely beyond the pale of the First Amendment. And then to further that, and then to say, hey, look, if you do this again, you could face dismissal, discharge, or discipline or discharge. That's unbelievable. So we have filed a complaint of religious discrimination and retaliation with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission because they need to know that the Augusta Schools Department is engaging in what we believe to be religious discrimination.
So again, let me just mention that these are the two prayer cases. I thought I'd mention one more. We mentioned it last week, but it's worth mentioning again while we're talking about schools. You had one teacher that was fired for talking about the Bible, and he was able to get his job back. That was a substitute teacher, and I thought that would be another one of those stories. Again, you can go to firstliberty.org. And it's an illustration, if nothing else, Jeremy, that every time I turn around, First Liberty's won another one of these cases.
We tend to do that, 90% of the time at the very least. Thankfully, we've got not only good clients that are willing to stand up for the religious liberty, but we're able to make the arguments in the way that we need to make them to be able to present the facts fairly, and then to say this is what the law is, and the judges are very keen on saying, well, the facts and the law meet up, and you guys win. But we lose 100% of the cases we never do bring. So, it's only because of our clients who are willing to stand up and to take a stand for religious liberty that our freedoms are well preserved.
So again, you can go to First Liberty, find out a little bit more about Mr. Tutka, who got his job back, which is very good, and find out a little bit more about Judge Mack and what's going on right now, and of course our case up there of Ms. Richardson in Augusta, Maine. So we've hopped around a little bit, but just to let you know that these are cases happening, and you're still waiting to see whether or not the Supreme Court is going to take the case of Monica Sterling. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah, they were supposed to conference on that, I think, yesterday, but they've postponed that for a while. So we'll see where that comes out.
And again, this is the Marine who had the verse from Isaiah on her computer and then was court-martialed over
That's
it.
Right.
And again, some of these you just cannot make up, but there is the situation we find ourselves. Well, let's get to the big story, and it's actually multiple elements. One of the things I posted here was Judge Napolitano. These things come so fast and furious, it's kind of hard to figure out which one is which. Of course, you have the firing of James Comey as the director of the FBI. Then you have the argument that the president, when he was with the Russian foreign minister and the ambassador, revealed classified information that might have endangered individuals that were gathering this kind of action. And then we have a series of other questions about some of the other actions as to whether or not the president was actually trying to prevent James Comey from pursuing certain kinds of investigation. So there are some people with their hair on fire suggesting that now it is time for impeachment, or if not, to impose the 25th Amendment to remove Donald Trump from office. Your thoughts?
I'm still getting over the hair on fire comment here, Kerby. Hopefully those who are watching the web stream can understand my humor in that. But this has been a monumental week with the president and the firing of James Comey and this memo and that investigation and this investigation. I think, frankly, the American people are going, I don't even know what to think of it anymore.
Yeah.
I don't trust anybody. I just want this all to go away.
Yeah.
That's not a good place to be as a country.
Of course, we also have to have special counsel, which I haven't even mentioned yet. But Debbie, what are your thoughts?
Well, there's one article, Kerby and Jeremy, that I came across and I hadn't emailed to. I want to mention to your listeners. There's a column called "This is a Coup Against Our Right to Govern Ourselves," and it was by this guy Kurt Schlichter.
Oh, sure. We've had him on before.
Oh, the basic point I want to make about this is, and I'd love to dive into any level of detail and all this because I've been doing Fox News all week on this, so I'm so tuned into the details. Okay, but the short story is, really, the American people in November last year really rose up and put into office someone that no one anticipated would win. The left was counting on Hillary Clinton winning. He stood up and said, I am going to secure the border. I'm going to stop bringing dangerous immigrants to America. He made a series of promises. And since that time, not just the American left and the media, but many even that call themselves on the Republican side have been working to find a way to remove him. And that is what this case is really all about. I mean, there are just a determined effort. This guy is not going to serve 4 years. And so I think this is the biggest victim of all of this kerfuffle over Comey and Russia and all that is going to be the Republican Party, because they are not standing by him. And all these voters who never voted and showed up last year to vote for him are seeing exactly why they voted for him, because they cannot trust the GOP to ever stand by him. And they're the ones going to be hurt by this more than anyone else.
Gary Bauer put it this way: if you look on May 4th, the House passed legislation that would unravel Obamacare, or the Affordable Care Act. May 7th, the president announced a slate of conservative judicial nominees to the court, some of which Kelly Shackelford, behind the scenes, has been working on. But at the same time, you have James Clapper and a number of others saying that the Russian investigation has provided zero results. And he said that's when you started seeing the real increase in the resistance, because even though Donald Trump, let's be honest, sometimes gives them a lot of fodder to work with, this had more to do with whether or not some of these actions being done by the Trump administration, sometimes even done by Mike Pence or by Tom Price or whatever, are going to last, because they are starting to see the unraveling of what was put in place by Barack Obama over the last 8 years.
Exactly right. On this, particularly with respect to firing FBI Director Comey, I think all your listeners probably know, but it is 100% within the president's discretion to fire the FBI director. He doesn't have to ask anyone or have a reason, and he chose to do that. And so that's the first point. He has the right to do it. The second point about it is, and the one thing I will criticize him for, it was rudely and unnecessarily rudely and kind of in a blustery way handled, instead of as President Clinton did when he called in FBI director, whoever it is he fired, I can't remember his name right now. He asked for his resignation. He worked toward it. He got another report. He asked again. He finally called him in and fired him. I think that maybe if President Trump had not been so causing the embarrassment of having FBI Director Comey learn about his firing by having he's giving a speech and people listening to the speech or watching the TV and the monitor and saying, hey, wait, you just got fired. And so that was unnecessary and it was rude. Having said that, every prominent Democrat in Washington has called for Director Comey's termination for months on end. Democrats have, Republicans have. The mere handling of Hillary Clinton's email scandal and how he handled that press conference, reason enough to terminate him. And the other thing, I know I'm on a roll here. Can I continue my roll there? Kirby's over there laughing. Okay, but just to finish this roll, and then you guys, but here the other really significant point is that just because President Trump gave us his reason, I'm terminating him because of how he handled the Hillary email investigation, does not mean he didn't have 6 other reasons in the back of his mind, as the rest of America did. So he hasn't been inconsistent to say, I fired him based on Rosenstein's memo to me saying the Hillary email investigation was bad. It doesn't mean it also wasn't true that he didn't care for him languishing on the Russia investigation, didn't care for other things he had done. That's not inconsistent. The media is out to get him and contort everything he says into inconsistency. And this is from someone who wouldn't have thought of supporting him in the primary. Didn't think of it.
Well, let's take a break and we'll come back and hear from Jeremy and a little bit more from Debbie. But also want to hear about this idea of a special counsel. And we have 2 lawyers here, so they can, I think, already establish that you was in the right of the president to fire the FBI director. But what about this idea of a special counsel? Where is that going to go? And what about some of these other issues of obstruction of justice? We have a lot to cover, and we'll do that right after this.
Is religious freedom still a cornerstone of the republic, or has it effectively been crushed by the forces of tolerance? America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of view can be a key part of a successful mission. I believe in America. I believe God wants His best for us. We can face whatever the world throws at us as long as we stand together. If you have not signed on, please do it now. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. Pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Or call us 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Weekend edition. If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. In studio with us today, Jeremy Dice of First Liberty Institute, Debbie Georgatos, host of America Can We Talk, and we certainly do welcome your phone calls. Let me, before we get to the next item, come back to one that Debbie mentioned just a minute ago. Is it within the purview and the responsibility and the authority of the President of the United States to fire an FBI director?
Yeah, and for any reason that he would so choose, or no reason at all, and perhaps he did flub this whole thing. I tend to think that if the president had simply gotten on TV with Comey sitting across the table from him and kind of gotten his fingers in that little pursed little way that he used to do and said, "You fired," like that, the whole country would have been fine with it all. But there was a different there was a different delivery, and I think the delivery, which is, I mean, that's perception, that's what actually reigns. That has been what has actually caused many of the problems.
Let's, if we can, get into the memo, because that's another part of this, and that is we heard actually when he was firing James Comey that 3 different times James Comey told him that he was not a subject of any FBI investigation. But according to a memo that other people have seen and the House is now trying to get a copy of, apparently, after the meeting, James Comey wrote down that Donald Trump said this: "I hope you can see your way clear to letting this go," meaning the investigation, to letting, again, Lieutenant General Michael Flynn go. He's a good guy. I hope you can let this go. Now, that, to some of us, doesn't sound like obstruction of justice. It sounds like the kinds of things that Donald Trump probably says when he goes out there for maybe a construction company and said, "Can we finally finish, the electrical? Can we finish the plumbing? So I can get the drywall up? Can we let this go? Or you got a problem about this?" Or some inspector is not clear, and they say, "Can you kind of let this go?" But of course, in the highly charged political world, this is perceived by some as obstruction of justice. What do we think about this?
I have a couple of thoughts on that. I do agree, Kerby, with the casual use of that term. I hope he can let this go. And to be really clear with our listeners, Lieutenant General Michael Flynn's name is in several different contexts in this whole case, but the particular thing that he was referring to was Flynn had a conversation with one of the Russian people that he had not disclosed. And that's, he was supposed to disclose. But I don't think that the let this go thing was referring to Flynn having been, it was a whole different aspect of it, whether Flynn had somehow been involved in Russian manipulation of America's election. And that let this thing go from Trump to Comey was about, okay, he's been fired, can we just drop it? But even if you think it was about both those different behaviors, the notion of saying, I hope you can see a way to clear let this go, is the kind of thing you say, all right, this is my 2 cents on it. I think you ought to let it go. He wasn't ordering him. He didn't threaten him and say, if you don't drop it, I'm going to fire you. Now, in the private sector world, it's a common phrase, as you say, Donald Trump probably used very often. In the highly charged environment in Washington, which I think Donald Trump is honestly still learning about, you just you can't be casual, you can't speak in a colloquial way in many contexts. But I will say on Comey, making a memo, writing this down, Comey writes down a memo and then brings it up saying, hey, I felt Comey is now saying that he felt Donald Trump was implying that he was threatening, obstructing justice because he said about Flynn, I hope you can let this go. But Comey wrote that memo like in February or whatever it was. And in the memo, he says, he's now referring to this conversation saying this is, an obstruction of justice. Well, federal law required Director Comey to immediately inform the Department of Justice of any attempt to obstruct justice by any person, even the President of the United States. So Comey obviously didn't think this was an attempt to obstruct justice because he made no such complaint to the Department of Justice. He can't be obstructing justice except when I have to report, then it's not. He can't concoct it later and say, now that I think about it, I think it was obstruction. Comey is falsely raising this as evidence of obstruction, or else he broke the law.
Well, and look, if we're speculating, and we are speculating, that what it means for the president to say, I hope you can see to let this go, if we're going to speculate that is certainly nefarious or something bad, then we also have to be fair and speculate that maybe it was something good.
Yeah.
Maybe there's delivery that say, hey, maybe this is over. Okay, great. Now going to let this go, right?
Yeah.
Now, who knows? We weren't in the room, and until those tapes prove us otherwise, I guess we got to. But the problem that I have the most here is just emblematic of everything else that's going on. You said the highly charged atmosphere of Washington. That's so true, but I think that's exactly what the other 48 areas of the country are saying, look, just stop. Let's get an adult in this room, and let's stop talking about this. I think it was so symptomatic when the story broke last week. There was a headline on the Hill that said, Schumer to Trump, Comey firing a big mistake, the Hill. And I got this picture that has all these headlines from a couple weeks ago that says, Reid slams Comey for influencing election with partisan actions. You may have broken the law. Schumer says he's lost confidence in Comey. Chuck Schumer says he's lost confidence in James Comey. What on earth? Do you think we're that stupid? Well, I think the answer is probably yes. but the reality is Americans are not that stupid, and we ought to remind our leaders, hey, look, have some consistency at the very least.
Yeah. And again, hypocrisy is certainly alive and well in Capitol Hill. Jonathan Turley, a liberal law professor, we've quoted from him quite often. He said, if this is food for obstruction of justice, it's still awfully thin soup. So even he's kind of going, can we move on?
But see, in this environment today, it's not enough that you disagree with your political opponent.
Yes.
It's not enough that you're willing to fight against your ideological commitments and have the truth come to the top of those two things. When your ideological opponent is wrong, you've got to shut them down, put them in jail, and get them out of the country.
Destroy them.
And this goes back to our first discussion, doesn't it, about speech itself.
Mm-hmm.
If we're breeding children in their schools today and in our colleges that are saying, I don't want to hear that opinion, and not only do I not want to hear it, but you don't even have the right to say it.
Yes.
This is where our problems are all beginning. It's being played out within our political square. I don't know if we're learning it from the political square as much as we're feeding it into the political square. But either way, it's got to stop. That's not the country our founding fathers put into place.
You know, there's an old phrase that has been attributed to Abraham Lincoln, although it's doubtful he ever said it, but it was the philosophy of the classroom in one generation becomes the philosophy of the government in the next. And if you see safe spaces and you see political correctness and shutting down alternative viewpoints, that's been happening on campus for some time. Now it's happening in the political arena too, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. Look, I'm worried about the future, given that all these kids today are using the spinners, the fidget spinners. My dad got me a fidget spinner too. It just had a 20cc engine and a weed whip on the end of it. So
that's a great line. That's a great line.
Debbie, you got any comments? Because we're going to move on in just a minute from the memo to classified information. But any other thoughts on this?
Well, I love that Jeremy's pointing out, and I think you were too, Kerby, that a lot of people in America are sitting back saying, wait, I just want our country to function. I want Congress to pass good laws. I want them to secure the border. I want to have immigration policy fixed. I want to have refugee policy that's consistent with America's security. I want to have us get out of the climate change or whatever they want him doing, climate change. I want these things to happen. And I think most of America sees this as just an ugly, ugly political battle. They couldn't comprehend that. They could comprehend. They don't choose to engage in learning all the details. They're just so turned off by it. And I think both parties are hurting themselves.
Yes. Well, again, a lot of this is, we hear a lot about impeachment up until a couple of days ago. Now they're starting to talk about the 25th Amendment. And you're going to laugh at this, but there are people that are convinced that some of the people pushing for impeachment are convinced that if you could impeach Donald Trump and remove him from office, that Hillary Clinton would be the next president. Now, I see you both laughing, and yet there are some listeners right now going, no. And they've done some surveys to find out that some people actually believe that.
Oh,
so
my gracious.
If that's what's in your head, because frankly, even if you were to remove Donald Trump, what would you have? Mike Pence. You'd have less of the bluster, but you'd have the policy. Matter of fact, you'd have a more conservative policy, probably. And so that the people on the left and some of the Democrats would still be upset about this, because really it's partially about personality, but mostly it's about the agenda, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I guess we could tell the folks on that list who are answering that question that way that Elvis is in fact dead and Bigfoot is not real. And that may be a big wake-up call to them as they go out and search for their own unicorns around the country here too. But, look, this speaks greatly to all what we've been talking about here.
Yes.
The lack of when the self-governed are that, I'll just be a little bit rude to us, if we're that stupid, then we probably deserve what we're getting. We're going to get the idiocracy that we're breeding ourselves into. And I mean, speaking of that point, there's if anybody's seen the movie Idiocracy, you know that Terry Crews is the president in that movie, the kind of famous muscle-bound actor. Guy, the Old Spice guy, right?
Yeah, I know who you're talking about.
The Rock is now being considered for a presidential
as the
contender.
next presidential candidate.
So we're inching closer to idiocracy.
You know, Anya, I
Cannot
love
make this up.
I love that you're saying all this, but I will say, I do think there are a large number of uninformed Americans who think that Hillary can become president if Trump is out. But I think a lot of Americans in the last 4 and 8 years became more tuned into politics than they ever had before because they had this gut sense the country was
Something's not
going
right.
the wrong direction.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I think they're watching this, and it's not playing well in Peoria, as they say. It's not playing well to see this new president just maligned by the Democrats, the media, and some of the Republican Party. It is not playing well, and they are tuned in, and they don't like it.
We're going to take a break and come back and talk about this special counsel, Robert Mueller, and what that might mean. And even yesterday, some people were saying, would he open up more than just an investigation on Michael Flynn and Donald Trump? How about Hillary Clinton? How about Loretta Lynch? How about maybe even President Obama? A lot to talk about right after this.
In her capacity as first daughter, and before she took an official position at the White House, Ivanka Trump organized a meeting with Cecile Richards, president of Planned Parenthood. Since Congress was considering proposals to defund Planned Parenthood, by far the nation's largest abortion provider, Ivanka wanted to learn more. Planned Parenthood's executive vice president, Don Logwins, told reporters that in this meeting, Cecile Richards had hoped to, quote, make sure that Ivanka fully understood what Planned Parenthood does, how it is funded, and why it would be a mistake for Planned Parenthood to be removed from being able to see Medicaid patients. During the campaign, Donald Trump had praised Planned Parenthood for its health services to poor women, but pledged to pull all taxpayer funding from the organization if it continued to do abortions. Then, again in March, the president informed Planned Parenthood it would have to quit performing abortions in order to retain its taxpayer funding. Ivanka was likely hoping to weigh in with her father in favor of Planned Parenthood funding. The New York Times recent profile of her states, those close to Ms. Trump say she is generally business-friendly and socially liberal. The paper also pointed out that she can effectively convey criticism to a man who often refuses it from others and can appeal to him to change his mind. Ivanka knows that a strong majority of Americans oppose taxpayer funding of abortion. In her meeting with Cecile Richards, she wasn't just fact-finding. The Times reports she also had a proposal. Planned Parenthood should split in two, Ms. Trump suggested, with a smaller arm to provide abortions and a larger one devoted to women's health services. But Planned Parenthood said Ivanka's idea showcased her naivete and her failure to understand how central reproductive choice, i.e. abortion, is to Planned Parenthood's mission. There you have it. Thanks, Ivanka, for allowing us to again be reminded that abortion is the central mission of Planned Parenthood's business. Our government should not fund it. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View. your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, we certainly put a lot on the table. We even talked about The Rock, I didn't think, as a presidential candidate. So if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. But I did want to at least put one more on the table, and that is we have a special counsel or special prosecutor, and that's Robert Mueller, who actually served 10 years and actually was so well-liked that even when his term expired in 2011, President Barack Obama asked him to stay on for an additional 2 years. So other than J. Edgar Hoover, he served longer than anyone else in the FBI and now will be the special prosecutor. And I guess he will join the special prosecutor for the IRS scandal. Oh, wait a minute, we don't have one of those. Or maybe the special prosecutor for the VA scandal. No, we don't have one of those either. How about a special prosecutor for Fast and Furious? You see where I'm going with this.
Yeah,
we have not had a
Foundation.
special prosecutor for any of these last 8-year disasters. But we do for something, and usually have a special prosecutor. Help us out. You both are lawyers. I thought we had a special counsel or a special prosecutor, whatever you want to call them, when you've had a crime. I don't know what the crime is. Help us out here.
The only crime that's occurred is whoever's leaking. That's
Yes.
the only confirmed crime, whoever's leaking things from the White House and the Justice Department. There has been no other. And even, just so for our listeners' clarity, even if Russia is the one who hacked in and sold and gave away all Podesta's emails, that's not a crime. I mean, if an American did, it would be. We can't charge criminally. You can't charge the country of Russia. There's not even a crime there. I mean, Russian interference in our election, yeah, okay, so it happened. It's not a crime. Therefore, no one could be guilty of conspiracy to because there's no crime. Even if Russia was being helped by Trump, it'd be problematic, kind of politically, big time, but it wouldn't be a crime.
Yeah, I mean, there was one of the articles we read here, I think by Krauthammer, that said that, look, the president can declassify material as he sees fit. All right, he's the kind of the top of the classified food chain. He's allowed to say, nope, this is no more. He just says, I think Krauthammer put it, he can just whisper in someone else's ear, hey, this is the secret. Well, that's all well and good, but when the Washington Post then runs the memo or the secret out in public, that could be a problem. They have the right to be able to report it once it's been declassified. But what happened in between those two things? Because clearly the president didn't whisper in the ears of the Washington Post, and as Debbie points out correctly, there was somebody who knew of that information, provided it to the Washington Post, and that issue itself is in fact a felony. Lord willing, the special prosecutor would get to the bottom of more than one of these kinds of leaks and find that individual. The problem is, as we've seen in the past experience here, that special prosecutors are given a whole lot of leeway, and that's been insisted upon with Mr. Mueller. And who knows where this ends up? If there's any past experience to guide us, we should probably talk to Scooter Libby about a few things and see how that turned out, and perhaps others in the Watergate investigation to see where one thing started here and ended over here.
Yeah, another thing, a pragmatic point about whatever it is President Trump shared in the alleged privacy of the Oval Office in his meeting, is that whatever he chose to reveal is not only his utter 100% prerogative, but also his decision that information should be shared with somebody is based on a mountain of material, of knowledge he has because he gets security briefings. He knows more about what the issue was, who needed to know what was going on, what would protect America than any Washington Post reporter. So he's using his judgment, which the American people have given to him in the presidency, to decide what should be told to whom and when. And so the idea there that Washington Post reporters can nitpick through and say, well, they shouldn't have said this because of the danger of this, and somebody won't like that. In fact, the person whoever leaked it to the Washington Post ought to be worried about being prosecuted by Mueller.
Yeah, and that kind of reminds me of the Ann Coulter column this week. She said, you Democrats better find you some lawyers, because if indeed this investigation goes, and again, Andrew McCarthy said that Robert Mueller is not a Lawrence Walsh type. You mentioned Scooter Libby and just a few others, and sometimes people get, or even Ken Starr, get caught up in other kinds of investigations. But even if you end up with a new FBI director, and they're talking about Joe Lieberman right now, there are some individuals that are saying the only way that you get credibility back in the FBI is to reopen some of those cases, like Fast and Furious, like the email server. Whether a Joe Lieberman would do that, I don't know. But before it's all through, the Democrats may say we really shouldn't have started down this road because it's opening up things we really don't want investigated.
And all this business about Russia, it's so interesting that this, what has come to the doorstep of President Trump is whether or not his connections with Russia were somehow criminal or problematic. Yet somehow Hillary Clinton survives as the Democrat candidate and as the still upheld, people on the left say she should have been president. when her term as Secretary of State involved clear evidence, it seemed to everyone else, pay to play. It involved having her end up with having Russia own 20% of the uranium assets of America, and they had $500 million. Her husband was paid to give a speech in Russia. I mean, it seemed clear it was pay to play. And what is uranium used for again? Oh, it's just energy. Right? I mean, seriously, this was a political director of the FBI, Director Comey, who protected Hillary, this is my opinion now, protected Hillary because he thought she was going to be president next. And if she's going to be president, he wants to be in that seat heading up the FBI. Now, I am casting aspersions on his character, and I recognize that. But that's a more logical explanation than any other one for why he would not have investigated what everyone could see was is at least very suspicious pay-to-play appearance by Hillary Clinton as Secretary of State.
And look, I think it goes back to what we've said before. Again, the president should have gotten rid of James Comey from moment one. Just clear the deck and start over here again. Right. Let's get a clean slate and get moving. The problem I had with Comey professionally, I don't know how to put it exactly, but when he usurped the power of the DOJ to not recommend prosecution, that's an attorney's call to make. That's the DOJ's call to make. It's not the call for the president, for the head of the FBI to make that call at all. And so I think going beyond that was probably reason enough to be able to make the call. It just came too late and in the wrong way. Should have just gone on TV, pursed the fingers, and said you fired day one. But
well, and back to the point you made just before we take a break, and that is, Jeremy, we have people watching this, and they're just horrified. Every Wednesday we have our Millennial Roundtable. And over the last couple of weeks, I've watched the millennials who are a lot younger than some of us sitting around this table here. And they're just like, has it ever been like this before? And the answer is, well, maybe the Civil War, maybe the depths of the Great Depression. Maybe during the last days of Watergate, but not really anything quite like this. And you can see a whole generation of young people that aren't registered to vote. And we've used the statistics before. More than 90% of millennials have a Facebook account. And you're lucky if you have even 50% of them are registered to vote. And only about a fourth of those registered to vote. Well, this kind of stuff, I don't think is going to increase their belief that who they vote for in this next election is going to make much difference.
Probably, but I would hope that the millennials would then become students of history and see that we've survived worse things to our republic than this, and that it took, what did it take to get out of those hard times? Sometimes it took, at least one time in our nation's history, it took an actual war to settle those issues. I pray again that never happens in our future. I think of my children and the possibility of them having to fight against brother. I don't even want to think about that issue into the future. But these issues can be resolved by people of both goodwill and a good and clear understanding of history and the purpose of our country. That is where we've gotten so far afield on things. And in fact, do you hear Chuck Schumer or anybody else talking about our history? I heard one politician complaining about this is going to the very soul of our democracy. I don't think that that's true. I don't think that's true. I think this is a political debate and one that needs to be solved. Yeah. But it's not one that's going to the soul of our country by any means. What needs to happen is that the soul of our country needs to come back around and to direct the rest of our country, to remind those that are in the swamp over there that seem to be happy to flounder around in the mud, that it is we the people who run this country and not you that we send to Washington. And if that means voting out every single last one of them, by golly, let's go ahead and do it.
Well, it seems like some of the swamp is being drained, but there's another election where some more drainage might necessarily take place. But let's take a break. We'll come back, and we mentioned Charles Kruthammer's column. That's the fifth one that we've posted here. And also, what about this idea of the 25th Amendment being used to remove a president from office and a couple of other issues? So we'll certainly put those on the table in the second hour. Also have the commentary by Penna Dexter, which we'll get to, that we air at the quarter hour. So if you would like to join the conversation, let's open up the phones again, 1-800-351-1212. Jeremy Dice, Debbie Georgatos will be back right after this.
From CBN Documentaries comes a new film, In Our Hands, The Battle for Jerusalem.
Our goal is clear, to wipe Israel off the map.
For 6 days in 1967, surrounded by enemies on all sides, Israel stood alone, fighting for survival. In Our Hands, The Battle for Jerusalem, in select theaters for a one-night event, Tuesday, May 23rd only. Theater and ticket information is available at inourhands1967.com.
We go through seasons, getting our education, falling in love, marriage, children, challenges, success. Sometimes the checkbook is full, and sometimes it's not. And through all of that, Point of View is here, working for you, working with you to make a difference. Please consider whether this is the season for you to support Point of View, to join the Truth Team. Join today at pointofview.net/team or call for details 800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Let's work together for good. Pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour, if you'd like to join our conversation, it is our weekend edition, and Jeremy Dice with us, as well as Debbie Georgatos. We will take some of your phone calls, 1-800-351-1212. Let's head out to Arkansas first. KCMH. Tony, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Yes, sir. I think you made a quote that you thought wasn't sure from Lincoln, and
Yes.
I found it in this book, America's God and Country. It's an encyclopedia of quotes from statesmen, constitutionalists, well-known people and court decisions. And it appears that Mary Todd Lincoln stated some of the last things he said just before he was shot at Ford's Theater. And the date is April 14th, 1865. It falls under this, and it says, under one of these statements that he made, the philosophy of the schoolroom, one generation, will be the philosophy of the government in the next. So I think it's an actual quote that he made.
Well, it's certainly been attributed to him.
Right.
And again, I think that's William Federer probably did that. And William Federer tries to dig those up as quickly as possible. And I've always been a little uncertain about it. So if that gives us some credibility, it illustrates again the point we were making. And that is, what's being taught in the classroom really ends up in the public square pretty quickly. So we should pay attention to that.
Either way, whether Abraham Lincoln actually said it or not, it is a fact.
It certainly is, and that's why I love to use it from time to time, just to remind us to pay attention to what's happening on campus. And Jeremy, we've talked about this. When you have safe spaces and we have shutting down, whether it's Milo Yiannopoulos or whether it's Ann Coulter or whether it's Charles Murray or whoever we might want to pick, and we certainly can go through a very long list of individuals who are not allowed to speak on a college campus, you can see how that philosophy has worked its way into the public arena, into the political arena.
Yeah, I think so. But the good news is that can be changed around as well. I'm grateful that we've got so many people that are sending their kids to Christian education, homeschooling their children, saying, I've had enough with the PC nature of the public school system. I want to instill with them. I love groups like Summit Ministries that are putting kids through a good grilling of their worldview so that they know how to equip themselves and prepare themselves to go and speak on these issues. Maybe that'll be maybe the classroom that'll be of the future is not one that we're readily seeing today, but Lord willing, that kind of thing will change. I've got bigger concerns about how fashion implicates these things as well. I mean, if you look at the jeans from the 1970s bell bottoms, that works its way into today's romp hymns today. What's that going to look like tomorrow? I don't know.
The romp hymns.
I wonder if our listeners know what romp hymns are.
It's like a romper for a man, apparently. You will never see
you'll
never see me or Kerby wearing one of those things. Perhaps one of the producers. I don't know.
I don't know. Yeah, the engineer. I don't know. We're having fun with that. Didn't Ted Cruz even make a joke about this?
He did. Yeah. You'll have to go on Ted's Twitter feed to read that one. That was a good joke.
Yeah, very good. Let's get back to the phones in just a minute. 1-800-351-1212. But one of the articles that we've posted here is by Charles Krauthammer. We've already heard that Debbie's not thrilled about a few things he said there, but the point he's making is that even if you are convinced that some of the things that President Donald Trump have done are inappropriate, this is, he thinks, nuts that we're now talking about the 25th Amendment. And I guess we need to explain that a little bit. This amendment was added after the assassination of John Kennedy, and the concern was, what do you do if you have an incapacitated president? Is it possible that you can set that person aside? We've had a few of those situations. Woodrow Wilson, you can even think about when there was surgery on Dwight Eisenhower. And so it does provide an opportunity for removing an incapacitated president on the decision of both the vice president and a majority of the cabinet. But this, as Charles Kruthammer points out, is just crazy stuff to suggest that all of a sudden you had somehow convinced a majority of the Trump cabinet and the Vice President, Mike Pence, to remove Donald Trump from office.
It's completely absurd, and I have to believe even those suggesting it in Washington are doing it tongue-in-cheek, facetiously, because it's absurd. It is, as Kerby mentions, it's for incapacity. Like when Ronald Reagan was shot and had to have surgery, they may have used it at that point just to say, for temporarily, he's not president, Bush is president. But this, even the idea that people think it's a funny idea to float in the media, what they're really doing is trying, the target is to diminish the legitimacy of President Trump. And again, this goes back to, it's just attempting to tell the American people, you're too stupid to pick a president because you picked someone that we, the establishment, don't like, and we're going to find one way or another to get him out, including calling him incapacitated just because he made decisions we don't like. It is absurd. It's also just, it's a dangerous tone that's taking place in Washington, this just kind of arrogance of the establishment on the left and some on the right, just to say, this guy has to go, we're going to find a way to make him go. I think it's bad.
I think it's instructive to read Krauthammer, if no the reason to get a good lesson on what good writing looks like.
Yes.
Because his point on this 25th Amendment idea is actually, he says, this is the worst idea since Leno at 10 p.m. It perverts the very intent of the amendment. It was meant for a stroke, not stupidity, for Alzheimer's, not narcissism. Otherwise, what it authorizes is a coup, a willful overthrow by the leader's own closest associates. That's good writing. You just can't make that up.
Yeah, I thought we'd progress beyond the Tudors and the Stuarts. I mean, he just is he's such a great writer, and that's why he's won the Pulitzer Prize. I see some of our callers want to get into the issue of the trip that Donald Trump is going to make, and also whether we should move the embassy. So let me mention, first of all, that next Tuesday, as we've talked about before, is this wonderful film, In Our Hands, The Battle for Jerusalem. It's done by CBN. We had Gordon Robertson, Pat Robertson's son, in studio here. And next Tuesday, just an opportunity for you to see something that reminds us of what has happened in Israel. This will be the 50th anniversary of the 1967 Six-Day War. And as he pointed out, they've used the authentic arms, either the actual ones or reproductions, the uniforms. It's all shot on places like Ammunition Hill. They had to go through all sorts of permissions. Can you imagine firing guns and exploding things in Jerusalem? You've been there before with your husband, I know, Debbie. So this is, first of all, just something I wanted to mention, that if you have not already tried to find out where that will be shown, it's shown in 700 different theaters. When I typed in my zip code, there were like a dozen different theaters within like 20 miles of where I live that are actually going to be showing it. That's something. But Robert in California wanted to bring up the issue of the embassy. So Robert, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. I really appreciate your show, Kerby. My question is, do you think the biggest issue of the week, I know with all this stuff going on, is Trump announcing that he's not going to be moving the embassy to Jerusalem?
This is one of those things that, if you're a little bit older, I guess I'm the oldest one around the table here, you see it every 4 years, every 8 years, every president, at least a Republican usually, and even some of the Democrats say, we're going to move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. They always say that, then they get into office and it never really takes place. And so maybe when we come back from the break, let's talk about that for just a minute, because he's going to, of course, Saudi Arabia. He's going to Jerusalem and Bethlehem, and you're going to, of course, eventually ends up in Rome, so you're going to have him visiting the leaders of some of the great religions of the world. And also, I think I passed on to both of you just all the security measures to protect the president when he's in Jerusalem. So we'll talk about that, because it's another one of those issues that everybody talks about, and yet never is it ever actually brought about. And I think it's time to recognize what the real capital of Israel is. And if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. We'll talk about that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Seth Shostak believes that this could be humanity's last century, but don't think that he's a pessimist. He's the director of the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence and warns us about potential dangers on the horizon, but also explains that our 21st century technology holds great promise. He believes we will be able to understand biology at the molecular level. That will give humanity the ability to cure all diseases, but it will also usher in an era of designer babies. He believes we will eventually produce offspring that are as different from us as dogs are from gray wolves. He also believes that we will expand into space to obtain additional resources such as copper, zinc, and platinum. Humanity might establish colonies on the moon or Mars. We might also develop huge orbiting habitats in space. He also predicts that we will develop generalized artificial intelligence. This will allow machines to take over jobs normally done by humans, and it is impossible, at least in the near future, that robotics will be so advanced that it will be difficult to tell the difference between who is a real human and who is a machine. If his predictions are true, and I believe they're fairly accurate, then we will need wisdom and morality to guide us through these new advances. Put simply, we need Christian ethics and morality like never before. Unfortunately, the moral foundation behind much of these technological advances is a secular humanistic one. We need Christians in the fields of science and engineering to provide moral reflection. And we cannot retreat into a belief that Jesus will return before all of these technologies are developed. He may not return when we think that he might. We should not be preoccupied with his coming. We need to occupy until he comes. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
In Our Hands, The Battle for Jerusalem. In select theaters one night only, Tuesday, May 23rd. Information at inourhands1967.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Weekend edition, if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Robert has put that on the table, and so now let's, if we can, talk a little bit about the Middle East. That is, of course, where Donald Trump is heading to, going first to Saudi Arabia, then he is going to Jerusalem, then he's going to Bethlehem, he ends up in Rome, and then Belgium and a number of other places. But it's, again, maybe good to put some historical context, and this is why when we had Gordon Robertson in studio, he said, I want, first of all, the younger generation to even know that 50 years ago there was this 1967 Six-Day War, and it developed because what you had were Arab nations surrounding Israel, and their battle plan was to wipe Israel off the map. Well, they weren't able to do so, even though the Jewish nation, a very young Jewish nation, was outmanned, outgunned. They had more tanks. Not only did they survive, they moved into Jerusalem. They even occupied the Golan Heights. But that hasn't changed. You know, when we have this negotiation taking place right now, you have to recognize that Donald Trump wants to negotiate a deal. But when one side wants to destroy you, it's kind of hard to come up with a realistic deal, isn't it?
Yeah, well, look, if he's going to be the negotiator in chief here, then I think the proper negotiator needs to understand the full deal that he's looking at here. And part of that deal goes back, unfortunately, centuries or maybe even millennia. Mm-hmm. And so there's probably a lot of reading that needs to be caught up with here to be able to manage this issue well. When you have one side taking a very absolutist position, you all go away, you don't come back. There's not really another way of saying, well, what's your next best offer? I mean, it's very difficult to make that happen. And the reality is this: my entire teenage to adult lifetime, we've been having the debate between these two sides and looking for two-state solution, one-state solution, whatever it might be. not been solved in any of that time. I don't anticipate it being solved in my children's time.
I don't either. And again, we have to recognize that part of that gets back to this issue of where you place our embassy. And if indeed you want to have our embassy in the capital, which is Jerusalem, there are some repercussions that no doubt would surface. And that's one of the reasons why, as Robert points out, one of the bigger stories that kind of got lost this week is a decision to not move the American embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem.
It was a backing down by the president, and I understand that there's just tremendous pressure from the international community not to make the situation in Israel more combustible and more dangerous, and all sorts of threats about the harm that will come to Israel, and innocent people will die if you do that. But I think we should have learned over the decades of dealing with the Palestinian Authority is they don't negotiate. They don't surrender anything. They insist on their right to everything they claim, and there is no answer for Israel except, as Jeremy was alluding to a moment ago, just Israel disappears, goes off the map. All the Jews leave. That is ultimately the only acceptable view of the Palestinians. So, in my view, it would be a really smart move. It would be more Trump-like to take a stand and say, we're moving the embassy, here it is, and now we'll go forward and talking with you. And I think there's also recognition that, this past week, I don't know if this is what influenced President Trump in part two, but he met with Mahmoud Abbas, who is the chairman of the Palestinian Authority in the White House, which sent a signal of legitimacy about Mahmoud Abbas. And I'll do a small little fact. I did research on him to learn. Do you know what his doctoral thesis was in 1982? Mahmoud Abbas?
I think it was about the Holocaust, pretty
much didn't happen.
Yeah.
That we're only under a million people, and three quick things he actually put, and some university gave him a doctorate for this. The Holocaust didn't really happen. There were no gas chambers at Auschwitz, and that the main reason Germans could be so successful in the Holocaust was because they had a secret ally, which was the Zionists. Yeah, the Zionists and the Germans got together. I mean, that's like insane. And he actually wrote this. So this is a man who has no agreement with the notion that Israel has a right to exist. And when you realize that about him, you have to change your negotiating stance. You can't start from a position, an assumption of reasonableness on both sides.
This is what Jeremy calls crazy talk, right?
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely. Look, I was more interested in the story that you passed around here for us to look at here. Kerby, there's apparently at the King David Hotel in Jerusalem has been built with presidents in mind and other people who can afford it for $5,700 per night. These are super luxurious suites that cost $5,700 a night. They have their own independent air conditioning. In case of a gas attack, they're built to withstand an RPG attack. And the quote that I love the best was of, I guess it's the manager of this hotel, the operations manager for the Jerusalem's King David Hotel. He says, and it sounds so matter of fact when he says it, if the whole hotel blows up, the suite will come down in one piece. So maybe a few broken bones, but they'll be alive.
And I watched him say that on the video, and I just said, boy, this is,
Now, look, I can guarantee you this. That's no Best Western.
That's the Best Western. Matter of fact, they're bringing in extra kind of stuff to protect from RPGs and everything like that. I mean, it's just unbelievable the amount of security necessary because Donald Trump is willing to go to some pretty dangerous places. I mean, he goes to Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. He goes to Jerusalem, goes to Bethlehem. Most of us around the table have been to Israel, but we've not gone to Bethlehem. And then he heads on there from some other spots.
To the Vatican. He's going to the Vatican also.
Going to Rome and all that, and eventually...
And good for him. I hope he comes back with no broken bones.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I would say if there's one thing the Israelis should know, it's security. I mean, they know in their airlines or in their airports, and they are just on 100%, red alert at all times because of what they have endured in the last decades.
Let's talk about that for a minute because Israel is about the size of New Jersey. If you wanted to superimpose the map of New Jersey onto Israel, it's pretty close. Now, what is being proposed so often is land for peace. Now, first of all, they gave up the Gaza Strip. How's that working for you? Not very well. But if you go back to the pre-1967 borders, I don't know that it's even 26 miles across. I mean, you are talking about almost no ability to protect the nation of Israel. And so when there is all this drumbeat of land for peace, I just don't see how you have a nation that has enough contiguous landmass to protect itself. Giving up the Golan Heights, where they could then launch rockets into the Galilee, giving up the so-called West Bank. there is just no possibility for any kind of integrity for a country. And so this is why when people talk about land for peace, it just isn't going to work. It's not going to happen.
It isn't. In fact, I believe if they were to give the Palestinians all this land for peace that they are asking for, at the narrowest, Israel will be 9 miles wide. Yeah. I mean, it's impossible. And you all, wherever you are in this country, you know how little 9 miles is. And if that's the actual diameter of your country at any point, and, the whole, the true victims in this ongoing and just horrible, conflict in Israel really are the Palestinian people. I mean, the Israeli people suffer too, but the Palestinian people, because there's a lot of evidence that talks about, that when people around the world send money to the Palestinians, they send money to support this boycott, divest, and sanction movement, BDS movement. It goes to Palestinian officials who do not spend it on food, shelter, infrastructure, anything their people need. The people are suffering, but it's mainly at the hands of their own leaders. And this effort of Donald Trump, I'm thrilled he's keeping the discussion going, because I think you just can't ignore it. But to get the historical reality that the Palestinian people, it's like negotiating with an Islamic terrorist who says, I believe in jihad, you must kill or convert, you must convert to Islam or be killed. Okay. Well, can we try, what are my choices? No. It's kind of like that. You can't negotiate with that. You have to use force to show what you're laying out is the only choice. Is not going to happen.
Yeah, to give it a little sense of scale, by the way, 9 miles wide, the city of Washington, D.C. is 10 miles square. Mm-hmm. So, to think about that, that's about the size of what they would have to be defending here. I've been to Israel as well, as I think as you guys have. I was thoroughly impressed with how prepared the people of Israel are for any number of contingent factors that may be out there, from just routine security, like the way that traffic flows around things, to more in-depth things with being very familiar with seeing people walking around with M16s hanging on their back, and willingness to use them very quickly and very easily without much thought given to it all. And so I think it's interesting that the president has made the choice to go to Jerusalem. I think that's a very symbolic choice, and one that I think will speak volumes to our allies, and a very important ally that we have in a quickly deteriorating Middle East region.
Yes. When we come back from the break, I'd love to talk a little bit about one other thing we learned from Israel is what extreme vetting would be looking like. Right now, we've had a lot of lawyers and judges and others say, well, you can't do that. But if you've ever been in Ben Gurion Airport, you know how they ask you certain questions, right? And that's what extreme vetting would look like for people traveling through an airport. That's what extreme vetting would look like before we bring in refugees from this country to determine whether or not they have an ulterior motive. So we'll talk about that. And we'll take some more phone calls. Maybe some of you would like to join us now as we talk about everything from religious liberty to the issue, of course, of James Comey and a couple of other issues, but we've also broadened it a little bit to the trip that will be taken by President Trump to many of these countries. And I know some of you would certainly like to weigh in with your comments about Israel. So if you'd like to join us, that number 1-800-351-1212. Last half hour, we'll open it up for your comments or questions. And if you would like to know a little bit more about some of the articles that we've been talking about, we have 5 of those listed under our See More section there. As you go there, you'll also have a chance to find out a little bit more about what's available at First Liberty Institute by clicking on the picture there of Jeremy Dice, and also learn a little bit more about America Can We Talk by clicking on the picture there of Debbie Georgatos. When we come back, we'll talk about what you're going to talk about on your radio show. Although I think this has been show prep for you, hasn't it?
Every time.
Every time.
Yes.
Let's take a break. But if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. We'll be back right after this.
Is religious freedom still a cornerstone of the republic, or has it effectively been crushed by the forces of tolerance? America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of view can be a key part of a successful mission. I believe in America. I believe God wants His best for us. We can face whatever the world throws at us as long as we stand together. If you have not signed on, please do it now. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. Pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221, or call us 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Jeremy Dice, Debbie Georgatos in studio with us. And Jeremy, you've got some news from the vice president. So see if you can share that with us.
I have a friend who's listening to the vice president speak right now, and he just mentioned to the crowd that he says, and I quote, "I guarantee you that President Trump won't get off the plane in the Middle East and start apologizing for America."
So there you go. Vice President Mike Pence speaking right about now, and we've got all sorts of people all over the place, so listening to some of those issues. Let me talk about a couple of court cases before we take some more phone calls, because we did talk about religious liberty the first hour, but it occurred to me that there are a couple others we might mention, and one that we've only talked about briefly is this decision that came from a Kentucky court that ruled that the print shop did not have to make gay pride t-shirts. Now, this reminds me a lot of the case that you are dealing with out of the state of Oregon, because in this particular case, we're talking about a man by the name of Blaine Adamson, had an organization and a print shop called Hands On Originals. That's when the Gay and Lesbian Services Organization wanted him to make t-shirts with the name and logo of the Pride Festival. Well, he said, that really violates my policy, and even gave some examples of times when he would not print material. For example, he had one that had a t-shirt that had an offensive word, and he didn't print that. Had another one that had a depiction of Jesus dressed as a pirate. But on the other hand, here's an individual that actually has had individuals working in his print shop that identify as homosexuals and has done business with the LGBT community. Well, this reminds me a whole lot of what you've been dealing with, Jeremy, up there in Oregon. We'll talk about that in just a minute. And in this particular case, though, they've eventually ruled in his favor. The lower court ruled against him, but the appeals court actually did. And you think about this is where you want some common sense. You wouldn't ask a print shop owned by a vegetarian to print something for the Cattlemen's Association. You wouldn't expect an African-American owner to actually be forced to print posters for a white supremacist group. And this is the same kind of thing. He wasn't being against the homosexuals. He's just saying, I cannot in good conscience print something like this, but I will then refer you to a print shop where actually those were printed. Now, if that doesn't sound like your case out of Oregon, except Oregon came up with a different answer, didn't it?
Look, it does in a lot of respects. I've thought about this case a lot, and I had the thought this morning, as a matter of fact, that what if a rival print shop had come to Blaine and said, "I'd like you to print a T-shirt for me." On the front, I wanted to say, "Go do business at rival print shop, phone number, address,
Yes.
and all that." And on the back, it says, "Don't do business at Blaine Adamson," or whatever the Hands On Originals T-shirt is. In other words, can he be compelled to create speech that is against his own shop and for his competitor?
Yeah.
And that's exactly what he's basically been put up against here. And that's what a lot of people are facing on these conscience issues is, hey, we're going to compel you to speak in a certain way. Well, we wouldn't ask or we wouldn't require a business to do the business of their competitor or to give business to their competitor or in some way put out their own business on some things. Why would we ask them to violate their conscience when it comes to their faith practices as well? And that's what I think that the court there in Kentucky has done well to get right. And what I suspect, and I hope, the court in Oregon will get right about Aaron and Melissa Klein, that we don't want to live in a country, oh, goodness sakes, we don't want to live in a country where the government says you can believe this way or you can believe that way, but if you believe this way, you're not allowed to be in the public square anymore.
Yeah.
In fact, we're going to put a muzzle on you and penalize you if you dare to speak any other way.
Well, and it's almost like this one out of Michigan, because we've talked about whether you're a baker or a florist or a photographer, a pharmacist, an innkeeper, even a county clerk, we're almost saying you can't be a Christian and have those convictions. Well, the latest one was this one coming out of the Michigan Beef Company, West Michigan Beef Company, where he had posted a article that explained why he thought homosexual marriage was not God's will. And the USDA inspectors saw the article and decided to take action and told the owner that if all the USDA meat inspectors and essentially shut down his business. So you're getting this growing list, Jeremy, of individuals that are saying, well, if I'm a Christian, can I really be a photographer? Can I be a baker? Can I be an innkeeper? Can I be a pharmacist? Can I be a county clerk? Now, can I be an owner of a meat packing company.
Yeah, can I be an educational technician and tell my friend that who's struggling and praying for him? Can I be a public health administrator and preach on Sundays? Can I be a 5-year-old little girl and pray over my lunch or at school one day without being told that it's wrong to pray in school? Can I be a 4th grade student and bring my Bible to class and read it during free reading time without being punished by my teacher? Can I be a 6th grade student and talk about in my PowerPoint class all about me and reference John 3:16, my favorite verse, without facing punishment for that as well? I could go on and on and on down the list. You can read all about them at firstliberty.org. These are cases that we're facing day to day, every single day in this country. That's not what the founding fathers put into place here. It is not to say we want a specific idea to be out here, and yours is not welcome. That's not true. That's not what we want.
Because I'm so blessed to be on this show periodically and hear these cases and be aware of First Liberty and follow just a variety of cases because of really through Kerby Anderson's show, I feel more informed and I feel more of a sense that there's just a strong hostility against Christianity. But I will say, I think that in kind of, I don't want to say heartland America is ignorant, but I mean in broad swaths of America's population, if you said there's an attack on Christianity, people say, what are you talking about? It's Methodist Church is still there right down the road. My friends go there. I go to the Catholic Church. I mean, they don't have any sense of it. And I feel like I'm just so thrilled for First Liberty to be pushing those cases and doing news conferences and putting stories up and keeping the website up to date. Because I think it is the way a country changes. We've had this conversation before. Countries change incrementally, and all of a sudden it's like the frog in the water. And all of a sudden, whoa, it's boiling and we're all done. Every single case you mentioned and the most people in America don't want this kind of thing to be what the law is.
Yeah, to pick up on the frog analogy, I mean, the frog could have jumped out at any time. He's had to adjust his temperature through that entire process until it gets to boiling, and he can't do it anymore because he doesn't have any more energy to jump out. Yep. We've got the opportunity right now as the water starts to boil to jump out of the pot, and we ought to do that. And we do that by listening to shows like this, informing ourselves, equipping ourselves well, but also going and getting the resources that you might need to be able to carry this fight forward.
And telling people.
Yeah, one of the best resources is Undeniable, right? And that is available at First Liberty. And I have watched that from being a thin kind of list of all the places where religious liberty is attacked back when Kelly Shackelford and Tony Perkins first put the first one together. I got the original autograph, but now that thing is a whole lot thicker because these are just seemingly coming every single day.
Yeah, no, it's our annual survey of religious hostility in America. Actually, the new one just went off to the printers, by the way, so it'll be out, I suspect, pretty soon. Look, if you don't want, these are cataloging the religious hostility in America across this country, and they're cited down to the web page. If you want to put it in your browser and go and look at it to see if we're lying or not, you can go do so. And you'll find that they're all very true. If you don't like reading that, we've got another resource for you. You can just download on your iPhone or iPod the First Liberty Briefing, or if you probably still listen to it here on this show here. It's a minute and a half, 90 seconds to be able to hear the story of religious liberty in America. You have to appreciate my voice, though, because I'm the host of it. So if you don't like what you're hearing now, you may not want to listen to it later on.
You have a great radio voice, as Kerby does. You really do.
Yeah, matter of fact, we always hear it as we're coming up in just 2 minutes from now, but today we play Penna Dexter, so you don't ever get to hear yourself, but we hear you every single other day, Monday through Thursday. Let's take a phone call, though, because I want to come back and talk about what are at both of the websites, America Can We Talk and First Liberty, but I've been a little remiss in getting some of our callers on here, so let's go to James in Texas. What would you like to add to our conversation?
Hi, guys. I've just been listening to you guys, and you guys have a fantastic program. But back to President Trump, I've been following it on the news and just been watching mostly Fox News. And for me, I think that the Democrats, what they're doing is, I call it political assassination.
Bingo.
That's what they're doing to Trump.
Yep.
That's what they're doing to Trump. People don't want to talk about it. People are afraid to say it. But the truth of the matter is, it's political assassination. That's what the Democrats are doing to Trump. And that's all I have to say.
Well, it's a good point. And again, there's an attempt to take him out. But even if Donald Trump were to say, I'm done, I'm just going to go to Mar-a-Lago and we'll just raise our child and not even think about this, you've got Mike Pence, and in some respects it might even be more conservative in some of the agenda than it is right now. And I don't think the left will put up with that any more than they would put up with what they're doing right now.
Yeah, I think the difference, I agree wholeheartedly, James. I love that you're saying that. I agree with that characterization of what's occurring. I think the difference with there were to be President Pence, which I don't want to jump forward and assume that will be the case, I think he is more of a traditional politician, so there would be more people in the GOP, in Congress and the House and the Senate who would work with him, and he's more familiar with them. I think he'd have a little bit easier dialogue with them, but still, he was elected along on the Trump ticket to go with these Trump values that people want and got behind. So he's still going to be pushing those, the wall, the taxes, refugees, all those things. So I think the battles will still, and repealing Obamacare, I think the battles will still be there. But I think Pence will have an easier time with Congress. I don't want that to happen because that lets the media and the Democrats win and shut down the American people.
I do think it's possible that Donald Trump might just decide to be a one-term president, and then in 2021, you've got President Mike Pence or Ted Cruz or somebody like that. We'll find out. We'll be back right after this.
In her capacity as first daughter, and before she took an official position at the White House, Ivanka Trump organized a meeting with Cecile Richards, president of Planned Parenthood. Since Congress was considering proposals to defund Planned Parenthood, by far the nation's largest abortion provider, Ivanka wanted to learn more. Planned Parenthood's executive vice president, Don Logwins, told reporters that in this meeting, Cecile Richards had hoped to, quote, make sure that Ivanka fully understood what Planned Parenthood does, how it is funded, and why it would be a mistake for Planned Parenthood to be removed from being able to see Medicaid patients. During the campaign, Donald Trump had praised Planned Parenthood for its health services to poor women, but pledged to pull all taxpayer funding from the organization if it continued to do abortions. Then, again in March, the president informed Planned Parenthood it would have to quit performing abortions in order to retain its taxpayer funding. Ivanka was likely hoping to weigh in with her father in favor of Planned Parenthood funding. The New York Times recent profile of her states, those close to Ms. Trump say she is generally business-friendly and socially liberal. The paper also pointed out that she can effectively convey criticism to a man who often refuses it from others and can appeal to him to change his mind. Ivanka knows that a strong majority of Americans oppose taxpayer funding of abortion. In her meeting with Cecile Richards, she wasn't just fact-finding. The Times reports she also had a proposal. Planned Parenthood should split in two, Ms. Trump suggested, with a smaller arm to provide abortions and a larger one devoted to women's health services. But Planned Parenthood said Ivanka's idea showcased her naivete and her failure to understand how central reproductive choice, i.e. abortion, is to Planned Parenthood's mission. There you have it. Thanks, Ivanka, for allowing us to again be reminded that abortion is the central mission of Planned Parenthood's business. Our government should not fund it. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes, and one of the things I complain about so often, and we try to rectify on this program, is you hear about a story and we never follow up. Of course, we've done this quite a bit with some of the religious liberty issues, but one of those stories, Debbie, you brought to my attention, and that's the so-called clock boy. Individual comes to a class with what looked like a bomb. It was just a clock taken apart. I think he was really trying to push the envelope. And then because he found himself in some trouble, then they wanted to sue. Of course, President Obama brought him to one of these events and all the rest. But what has happened in this court case involving the clock boy?
Yes, this was apparently a ruling just yesterday, but a judge dismissed the entire case, dismissed all the defendants in the case. And to be really quick, this young man is Muslim, and so and his dad, who is from the Sudan, but is an American, I think he's an American citizen now, the family was claiming that the reason the school reacted to him bringing this to school in such a harsh manner, he was actually briefly arrested, was because of religious discrimination and preconception that he might have been bringing a bomb to school because he was Muslim. So the court threw out the whole case, which means they're throwing out against the school district, the city of Irving. And so those are the remaining defendants. There were other individual defendants who were previously dismissed. But the basic ruling of the court was that there was no evidence that would allow a trial to go forward on the claims that the young man had raised that were challenging and he raised actually his Fifth Amendment rights had been violated. That's what the complaint originally wrote. So the Fifth Amendment, I even marked, I was going to read, not the entire thing, I promise, but the Fifth Amendment was basically, he was complaining about the idea that the way he was deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, that he was somehow singled out. Anyway, the court said that doesn't hold any water. Case thrown out. They gave him, though, until June 1st to refile, and in order to move forward with the case, he has to allege and show the elements of intentional discrimination against him because his argument was because he was Muslim, and that's, we're talking in the break about the idea, if you had the elements and you thought you did as his lawyer to allege intentional discrimination, you would have alleged it in the original complaint. I think they didn't go there because they thought they couldn't prove that. So it's a great thing because this to me is a false flag about religious discrimination.
Yeah, and they will certainly try to correct that mistake, I'm sure, and have to go back through that entire briefing process itself. But I don't know exactly what happened in this case or why, but if we are profiling in that manner, then that is clearly something that we should be against and are against. But far too often than not, there are real cases that sound so crazy that they couldn't possibly be true. I know that because I've been a part of them so often. Mm-hmm. And at least for my part and for the cases that we represent at First Liberty, at least I know this. I sit in the kitchens of these people's houses. I sit in their living rooms. I look them in the eye before we ever think about bringing a case. And I hear their entire story. I sometimes go to their houses of worship with them. I get to meet them face to face. I know the ones that, like Mackenzie Fraser, the sixth grade student I mentioned a minute ago. I sat in their house and had their dog, climb up on top of me. These are real people that have real issues and have real concerns. Tony Richardson, we talked about earlier, she just wanted to know, what are my rights? And I said, well, these are what your rights are, but here's how they've been violated, and here's what really probably should happen. And she was just shocked. Oh, man, that's what needs to happen next. And so whenever you see these stories, at least at First Liberty's part, I want you to know you can take them as true. And we ought to at least give a benefit of the doubt to people when necessary, but look into them yourselves and see if they are actually true or not. We post all of our pleadings online. You can read all of them, and you read the entire story, and you can read the good and the bad, and come to your own judgment on these things. But thankfully, we have a First Amendment that allows us to be able to do that today. We have it today. Let's hope we have it tomorrow.
Yep. In this case, Jeremy, that's just such a good summary. In this particular case, which came to be known as Clock Boy, to be clear, the young man's dad is the plaintiff, suing the city and the school, claiming religious discrimination, and the certain elements of the case made it seem as though the dad had kind of set the whole thing up. I mean, the young man brought this thing to school. It looked like a bomb. The teacher said, leave it behind my desk, and he didn't do it, and he got it out again, got people nervous, started asking questions of him, and he was coy and non-responsive. And honestly, whether he had blue eyes and blonde hair and came from Norway, it was suspicious, alarming conduct. And so that's what happened. The school said, you know what, this is making us nervous. And that's how he was briefly arrested and then released and not prosecuted and didn't go to jail. But he just, they made it, you can't come to school. He was charged with, or what the temporary charge was bringing a hoax bomb to school, and which is what he did, or what he appeared to have done. And the dad just seemed like looking for publicity, and the city and the courts are just not going to have any of that.
Yeah. Let's take at least one more phone call. And again, we also want to, before we finish here, talk about AmericaCanWeTalk.org as well as FirstLiberty.org. But we'll go to Missouri for just a minute. KNEO and Mike, what would you like to add to our conversation today?
Well, it just seems like every time everything that the man tries to do, that they just got this vendetta against him. And, why don't they let the guy gets business, and quit messing around with all this other stuff.
I think that's kind of where we find ourselves. There are a lot of Americans that are saying, well, just get something done. Let's pass some bills, and nothing works better than success. And at the end of a couple of years, you can see that jobs are increasing and the GDP is increasing, and we have a growth rate of 3 to 4%. A lot of this is just going to be forgotten. But if indeed you get involved in all of the swamp cleaning and you don't get any positive legislation, I think that's going to be the problem. So they're going to have to make sure that they get their priorities right.
Yeah, but I think Mike is exactly right. This is not accidental, however. I mean, what have you heard lately about legislation? What about that wall that had been proposed a couple weeks ago? What about the budget crisis we had, a near shutdown just even a few days ago? I mean, whatever came of that? But what about the Obamacare process? Is the Senate considering that still? Where does that stand on things? How about the Religious Liberty Executive Order? Has the IRS taken up the call from that to issue new regulations on 2 or 3 year old litigation that is still going on and we're waiting for things to happen on? What's going on with the Johnson Amendment? We can go on down the list of things. There's a reason why a lot of these things come up, and there very well could be real problems here. I don't want to discount that there could be real smoke or fire underneath a lot of the smoke. But my guess is, and a lot of Americans I think are believing this, we've heard so much crying wolf right now, we don't believe any of y'all.
That's right.
And just go away and get back to the business of governing and stop acting like 2-year-olds.
Yeah, and I would say if I were advising a Trump team, I would try to hold press conferences that announce the exciting development that we have nominated 10 judges for the openings in the district courts or district and appellate courts on the federal level. We have accomplished this. We've moved this along. And just this is what you hired us to do. This is what we're doing, because the media's kind of owned the narrative for the entire last 10 days at least, that everything that's going on in the entire world is simply the whole Trump, Russia, FBI collusion thing, allegation, which has not yet had no evidence. I'm sorry.
Real quickly, AmericaCanWeTalk.org. People can listen to your program on Sunday. And, of course, if you are in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, you can listen to it on radio, but you can watch it. And I've watched it lots of times on Facebook Live. So it's been a lot of fun.
I urge you, yes, thank you so much for this opportunity. America Can We Talk Facebook page. We always live stream. You can watch the show there. You can also go to AmericaCanWeTalk.org, click on Listen Live, and you can hear it. And you can also call in and leave a question ahead of time, 214-556-5659. Keep it 1 minute or less. And also our website, AmericaCanWeTalk.org.
And FirstLiberty.org. And I would encourage people to sign up for your email so then they'll know about all the things happening in Augusta, Maine, or right here in the state of Texas, or wherever it might be. So
yeah, that's right. Go to FirstLiberty.org. We're also on Facebook and Twitter at First Liberty, 1ST Liberty on Twitter, and I think it's /First FIRST Liberty. Just search for it on Facebook. You'll find it there pretty easily.
Yeah, we have it next to your picture there, so we have that there as well. You might even watch that press conference of you, the Attorney General of the state of Texas. That was a very good press conference. Fairly short. So
very short, 5 minutes.
5 minutes. Not often. Can you get lawyers to say anything in 5 minutes?
Hardly.
That was amazing. But again, we're out of time. We're going to have a great week next week, but let me encourage you to enjoy the weekend. I want to thank Andrew, Alisa, and Shamila for the help behind the scenes. We'll see you back here on Monday.
From CBN Documentaries comes a new film, In Our Hands, The Battle for Jerusalem.
Our goal is clear: to wipe Israel off the map.
For 6 days in 1967, surrounded by enemies on all sides, Israel stood alone, fighting for survival. In Our Hands, The Battle for Jerusalem, in select theaters for a one-night event, Tuesday, May 23rd only. Theater and ticket information is available at InOurHands1967.com.
We go through seasons, getting our education, falling in love, marriage, children, challenges, success. Sometimes the checkbook is full, and sometimes it's not. And through all of that, Point of View is here, working for you, working with you to make a difference. Please consider whether this is the season for you to support Point of View, to join the Truth Team. Join today at pointofview.net/team or call for details 800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Let's work together for good. pointofview.net/team. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.